We talk about burnout all the time, but there's a specific kind of burnout called moral injury. And moral injury is not like the I can't sleep and I can't eat and I'm just hating life. It's the maybe this job is not exactly like I thought it was. Like when you go through training and then it turns into, like how many new patients did you see? How many IVF cycles did you do? And that just kind of on repeat. A lot of those skills kind of disappear into the void when it becomes part of the machine. A lot of these networks at the contract level are starting to sound very similar. The text, the boilerplate language, it's all the same, right? But the marketing campaign from Inception is really different. And I think about sort of the honest journey of fertility rather than sort of the pictures of families and like, let's just throw 10 more pictures of families out there and let's make this sound like bubblegums and unicorns. Like it's not like that.
How many fertility doctors feel burnt out today? Like the good outcomes no longer outweigh the frantic pace, high demands, and low points of being an REI. I decided on the title for the episode. Me, not my guest, Dr. Jason Yee, doesn't suggest that all fertility docs are burned out, and he talks about how he went the other way instead of going into the lull. But this topic is at the forefront of what so many of you are talking about right now. I decided it needed a strong title. This topic might hit especially hard for those REIs who are 7 to 10 years into their career. My guest comes from that peer group, Dr. Jason Yee of Aspire Fertility in Houston, also on the Prelude Inception Physician Advisory Board. He comes from academic medicine before that at Duke. He knows the startup scene by sitting on advisory boards of companies like Sunfish. He's a full-time clinician and now national medical director for the network. No wonder why he's talking about burnout. Younger docs, you get to use this conversation to think about how to get the most out of your personal, family, and work life. Docs who are a little bit closer to retirement, I wonder what you think. Jason describes the lull that many REIs, particularly those in his life stage and age group, are talking about right now. He shares comments from a fertility physician Facebook group from doctors who are exhausted and disheartened. He talks about how doctors start to feel when they have to do more than, say, very generally 300 cycles per year. Solutions that different doctors offer to stay engaged, grit, and perspective. Why Dr. Yee thinks Inception Fertility is a good place to work, to stay engaged, and their attitude that family comes first. Why physician executive leadership isn't necessarily an advantage, and why corporate leadership is sometimes better at giving doctors autonomy. I think this conversation applies to almost all of us in the fertility field, but if you're a doctor that feels underwater or feels like you've gotten over that lull, I would love it if you sent me a quick note, and I bet Dr. Yee would too.
Today's advertiser helped make the production and delivery of this episode possible for free to you. But the themes expressed by the guests do not necessarily reflect the views of Inside Reproductive Health, nor of the advertiser. The advertiser does not have editorial control over the content of this episode, and the guest's appearance is not an endorsement of the advertiser.
Jason, welcome to the Inside Reproductive Health podcast.
Thank you very much for having me. It is a pleasure to be here. No question.
So you have a full-time job. So
absolutely.
You decided to do something on top of your full-time job. Why did you decide to do that?
I'm about 10, 11 years out. And I think to speak personally and also personally about some colleagues of mine, which I won't reveal their names, but there is sort of this lull, I think, that's very common amongst physicians that are 7 to 10 years out. I don't want to speak for everybody because everyone's got their own life, but, this particular job, with any job, I think there's a lot of learning that happens, but at that 7 to 10 year mark, I don't know what it is, but there is this feeling, and I want to make it sound more positive than negative, but I'm sure the words will come out sounding more negative, but it's just kind of like, is this it? Is this all there is? Because the care is great. The outcomes are great. You really feel partnered with a patient, helping them achieve their dreams, literally complete their family dreams. But I think, when you're doing something like hundreds of cycles a year and, some days it could be dozens of transfers a day, there might be something that you're looking for. And this is often that time where, you look around and you say, well, what else could I contribute? Because we were raised by a whole generation of academic physicians that kind of left their mark on the field. And, I'll share also another kind of personal-ish thought. There's a Facebook group actually of fertility doctors, and we share all kinds of clinical questions. A lot of it's anonymous, so, protect privacy and all that. But one of the most touching posts actually happened a few months ago where physicians were just kind of talking through that emotional burden, emotional stress that this job can give you, and this sense of whatever you want to call it, transference, where you take on the emotions of all of these outcomes. It's very easy to bring that into your own mind, into your own life. And some physicians really can struggle with that. And I think, whether it's to create a more durable physician, someone that has more career longevity, whether it's professional purpose, equipping yourself for that side of the clinical care, but then also finding some way to contribute back meaningfully to the field, that could be very special. So there's something that happens at that 7 to 10 year mark. And I think in these corporate networks, I really do feel like that may actually become even more front and center as the years go on, because I've seen different practices just sitting in my same city in my same job. I've seen the transition, but we're about to see, I think, a lot of jobs where a lot of fellows join a practice and maybe their entire career will be spent in these corporate networks. And there really needs to be a carve out for these professional developments.
So do you think at that 7 to 10 year spot that it's often the case where people, they want to avoid the lull, so they get the itch like you do, and then they move on to something else? Or you think that the lull is what happens to many people at that phase where they just kind of say, yeah, I guess this is it now, and they just kind of go on autopilot?
I think it's a personal choice. I think, as with many things, you either choose to dig in or dig out. And I say this with affection, but, you can drink the Kool-Aid from one cup or the other cup or whatever purpose you find. But I think I want to share, if you don't mind, I'll read out, actually, I prepared this as a separate thing, but I'll read the Facebook post, and there's no names attached, but I think it's very special to hear and might give you an answer. So this was the first post. It said, I'm a decade into working at an IVF practice and have been struggling with burnout for the past year. There is increasing inertia to come to work. The positive pregnancy tests don't bring me quite the spark they used to. I also internalize the failed cycles and worrying that a lot of the growing numbness is a sign of burnout as well. Our high stress and demanding patients can be challenging. And then here's where maybe the answer to your question shows up. My salary is needed to support our family with 2 young children. We're under corporate management, but I have maintained a reasonable work-life balance. And although more time off would be nice, I dabble in a few consulting projects to keep things interesting. I have many hobbies. I want to last another 15 to 20 years. What are some strategies to keep us going? And that thing just blew up to the point where it was touching. And, that summary of feeling, I don't think everyone feels it, but in my own job, I think if I were to be honest with myself, I definitely felt it around year 7, 8. And it was a conscious choice to say, do I dig in or dig out? Do I think of this as an autopilot-like robot job and find fulfillment in the small areas, or can I find professional purpose? And I'm a little bit lucky because our corporate headquarters are happening, they're in Houston. So I'm well connected to that corporate team, and I've found them to be, great resources, fun people to hang out with, and they're really creative minds. So that's been great for me. But I think every physician kind of has to make a choice.
Do you think that's a generational thing? I want to talk about the workforce writ large, but I also want to talk about REIs. You've been doing this for 10 or 11 years that you've been in practice. When you think of those docs that were maybe closer to retirement, or those docs that were 10 years older than you, were they working less hard than docs today? Were they working harder? It nets out at about the same. So I'm wondering, so many people feel burnt out today, but I'm wondering, is that an increase in workload and it's more than it was before, or is it something else?
I mean, I don't necessarily think it's a difference in work hours, because the hours of the job are reasonable. And I think we're blessed and lucky to be in a specialty where most of us aren't walking around at 3:00 in the morning in a hospital operating, right? And there are many jobs in medicine that still require that. But I think it might be the pace of the job, truly, because, I'm talking to you from my home office. And in the throes of the morning, I got 3 monitors set up, messages, emails, patients, cycles, and it's just like clicking at a pace that is unbelievable. Now, it's not sustained over the whole day, but there's probably a good 3-4 hours where like I couldn't really have a personal thought go through my head if I wanted to. And I think maybe it's the pacing of it. I also think, burnout is a really interesting topic because I think a lot of medical communities, call it the AMA or ACOG. Like we talk about burnout all the time, but there are maybe even more specific categories of burnout. I don't love this word because it sounds, again, worse than it actually is. But there's a specific kind of burnout called moral injury. And moral injury is not like the I can't sleep and I can't eat and I'm just hating life. It's the maybe this job is not exactly like I thought it was. Like when you go through training and you're going through labor and delivery and you spend 3 hours taking out, some incredibly complex cancer mass with your cancer team, GYN oncology rotation. And then all of a sudden you show up with all of this training. I mean, I would be remiss to say if all fertility docs graduating these days have world-class training. And then it turns into, like, how many new patients did you see? How many IVF cycles did you do? And that just kind of on repeat. There is a beauty to that. I will not deny that. But I think it may feel like the expectations didn't quite fit the job perfectly. And there's still a gap. I think there's still a network responsibility. There's sort of call it a field, call it an industry responsibility to help these super high charged, high powered physicians to kind of flex all those skills, whether they're leadership or clinical or research or whatever they may be, because a lot of those skills kind of disappear into the void when it becomes part of the machine.
The pace is interesting. I'm glad that you brought this up because one of the things I've been thinking about recently is that everybody's underwater. And I ask people at every conference I go to, and if I'm speaking, I ask the audience and I ask them to raise their hand. And I say, if you just feel completely underwater, will you please raise your hand? And so there's REIs, there's practice managers, there's folks from the business side, embryologists, people on the industry side. How many people do you think raise their hand, Jason? Nearly everybody.
Yeah. That's like asking if people are, does the Pope wear a funny hat? Right. Yeah,
right.
It's 100%.
Yeah. Do you breathe oxygen? Virtually everyone raises their hand.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'll ask them in private conversation of, do you feel completely underwater? One of the reasons why I ask is because it makes me feel better. It's just like, okay, this is like this. The grass isn't greener. We are all feeling underwater. And then I think about, okay, well, why do we feel underwater? We make good money. We're way better off than most people out there. We're definitely, we have more opportunity than most of the people who came before us. But whether you're industry or you're a doc or an embryologist or business side, you feel completely underwater. And I think it has to do with pace. And maybe even more specifically than pace is like the franticness of the pace, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like the multi-directionality of like, I have to work on this and now I have to work on this and now I have to work. And I've got these 8 different competing interests that everybody is telling me is an equally high priority. And I have a really hard time rank ordering those priorities because if I let even one of them slip, there's going to be serious consequences that ripple. So can you talk about can you talk about the franticness of REIs and what they're feeling?
I mean, so I want to take your pace and raise you actually, but let me say a few thoughts about the pace. If you believe Eduardo and Kate's research and say like, okay, we're all going to hit 1,600 cycles a year one day, these are publications in FNS. I mean, who cares about our pace? Like we're about to quadruple everybody, so we need to have mastery over skills and time to even accommodate for that. But I would also take it one step up. And this is sort of a concept that's taken from a fellows talk that I give at our sort of annual Park City retreat. And I don't actually think fellows are the perfect audience for this because half of them are first years, half of them are third years, and most of them are just looking at me like, okay, I get it, but I don't think they really get it yet. But it's this idea that our field, if you click on a website, go to any practice, you look at targeted flyers and Instagram ads or whatever, you would think that these success rates are incredibly good. Like families everywhere, pictures of babies, and you kind of maybe expect a certain outcome when you pick up the phone or make that appointment. And there is data on this actually. So I would love to ask you, and if you don't want to answer, that's fine, but what do you think is the average patient perspective on what a first cycle IVF outcome would be? Like, what is the probability they think? That's a great guess. Apparently, for a sampled population, it's around 50% is what they thought, which I think is fair. It's like a coin flip, 50-50.
Okay, I would have thought that the average person would have thought it to be much
I
higher.
agree. That's actually my first observation, is that I would agree. So now imagine that you are a fertility specialist and you're sitting in, whatever city, Indianapolis, Houston, Dallas, San Antonio, whatever. And you wait for 100 IVF cycles to come in and leave. And after 100 people do one cycle, what do you think is the total live birth outcome for one cycle? And before you answer, I would say, what do you think the real number is? And keep in mind, none of us have clinics where we're seeing exclusively 30-year-olds or 25-year-olds, right? We're seeing 38, 40, 41, 42. But I asked the fellows this, what do you think that number might be? And I think that might sort of back end into the answers to your question.
So it's live births per 100
Yeah,
cases?
live births per 100 retrievals, all comers in the clinic, all the patients that do treatments as published by SART.
I would think that that's like 30-ish%, and that's probably what the fellows say.
That's a wonderful guess. A lot of fellows actually guessed higher, right? And so 30%. Some clinics are in the low 20s, some clinics are in the mid 30s, but really no clinic is above the mid 30s. And so when you think about the pace and the frenetic energy that we have, I really don't think a lot of that frenetic energy is directed at the 1 in 3 patients that have a success. I mean, those are the great cases. You do a consult, you get a follow-up, you plan for your cycle, you get your retrieval, you get your transfer, boom, everything just moves well. And those are the patients where you're just like, high five, everyone. And, you advertise those patients. But unfortunately, everyone's got something. It's, low sperm, uterine polyps, uterine fibroids, recurrent pregnancy loss. And next thing you know, you spend a lot of time basically working damage control. And this idea of basically helping patients cope, whether it's, unhappiness, sadness, frustration, billing, insurance, whatever it might be, these practice managers, I mean, they'll tell you they don't spend their time dealing with the happy patients. They spend all of their time basically putting out fires. And that gap, the 65% that are unsuccessful the first try, we just got to try again. And that's probably where a lot of this energy is spent. And there are, if I may get a little philosophical here, right? This is not a new idea, I should say. There's an old timey philosopher. I think he was a Catholic priest at some point, but basically said that whenever a field pops up in medicine, it can feel like something has been commoditized. And so now we chase these outcomes, like patients become the outcome or cycles become the outcome. And maybe our field has sort of forgotten a little bit on what it means to teach the physician how to help patients cope through challenges. And that's how we spend most of our time. And that's why I think it kind of answers the whole 7 to 10 year fatigue, because those tough outcomes, negative cycles, unfortunately, it's a lot of our time, actually. Most of my day is not high-fiving pregnant patients. Most of my day is dealing with, second opinions from other cycles. I literally saw a patient today who's failed 15 transfers, right? And trying to find a North Star for that patient, that is all consuming for the patient and for us. And so, yeah, I think finding that balance of helping patients through. I got a good friend in St. Louis. He jokes that if you look up the word assuage in a dictionary, that you're going to find a picture of a fertility doctor, because that's basically what we do, is we help assuage people as they get through their, reproductive journeys.
To assure and to encourage, is that what assuage means?
Assuage, less encourage, but more to sort of help get through the like Band-Aid up someone's feelings or Band-Aid up someone's challenges, to make things better, to ameliorate, let's practice some SAT words here, right? To just improve the feeling around something. And sometimes it's not assuaging. Sometimes it's like, man, I don't think this is ever going to work with any mathematical possibility. But sometimes you really do believe that it can, and we have to assuage the situation and help someone through it.
So this 7 to 10 year burnout that seems to be pretty commonplace, and I'm not just hearing it from you. I'm seeing it more. I'm seeing some people take sabbaticals or hiatuses at much younger ages than I would have expected to have seen that. There are some people that I think maybe they're still kind of in the tire kicking phase, but some people that are really, really productive REIs in this space that have confided that, you know what, I might go be a medical advisor for some company for a couple years, or I might go in a different field for a little while. And I think of what a loss that would be to the field, even if it were just for a couple years. And so you're hitting on something that's common. Have you heard that sentiment before as expressed by that Facebook commenter when he or she said the positive pregnancies, or the pregnant families, like, that's not giving me the upside that it used to? Is that sentiment common? Have you heard that more often?
I do. I stay connected to a lot of friends around my years, plus or minus a couple. It's just kind of how we grow up together. And it's a very private feeling that we share to each other because it doesn't feel good to say that out loud, right? Like this is
What is it? Is it like how pro athletes feel that losing feels worse than winning feels good? Is it that?
oh,
Or
interesting.
is it something else?
I mean, I think it might be something else. I think in the busyness of the day, our greatest joy should be to celebrate a kiddo that comes to the office with their parents. That should be the greatest top end joy for our field. But I can speak that when I have 3 patients in the waiting room, 2 saline sonograms, and, a bunch of unanswered messages on Teams, and then a mom brings in the kiddo and says, hey, can we just hang out with you for 5 minutes? 100% of my brain says, I would love to spend time with you. But 110% of my brain is like, this is a very difficult time in my day right now. If you had come at 5:30 or 7 in the morning, this would be a totally different story. And so I think maybe it's time, maybe it's pace, maybe it's more than that. But there is definitely a feeling to that. And I think, the human mind is really accustomed to contrast. And, unless you start to see, many, many different parts of the field, by 10 years, I mean, you're thousands and thousands and thousands of cycles in, like things just don't necessarily phase you as much anymore. And that's good and bad. But I was talking to a younger doc in my own network, and he literally asked me this exact same question without any of this context, none of this conversation. And saying like, well, how do you get through a day when you've had all these negative pregnancy tests? Because invariably, if you're going to do 20 transfers over 2 days, you're going to have a bunch of negative tests. And some of those negative tests will hit a patient that's had like 10 negative tests before. And you're like, oh my gosh, like, how do you do this? And I asked him the question, time out, are you telling me that your personal fulfillment and your daily happiness is tied with your patient's outcomes? And he's like, well, yeah, why wouldn't it be? And I'm like, time out, that is not sustainable. How I think we have the luxury of having great outcomes, but you would never ask that to a hospice care, palliative care doctor or an oncologist. They have a lot more training than us for how to deal with these tough outcomes. And I would say that much of our job, until you are an attending in a fertility clinic, we don't really have any of that training. And, the fellows talk that I give ends with a whole series of slides talking about how, you should develop your skills as a communicator, as a speaker, as an empath, to know what your own stress response is, because knowing that and being able to move through those emotions can literally mean the difference between survival and not surviving. I'm a huge tennis fan, and Wimbledon's going on right now. And I know everyone hates Novak, but I freaking love the guy. I love him so much. And maybe he was a little immature in his younger years, but as an older person, he has these incredible interviews where he talks about emotional reserve and the ability to move through something. And that might be his greatest gift, is that something bad happens, he moves through it. And when someone called it a gift, he actually shut that interviewer down and said, this is not a gift at all. This is actually a trained skill. When I lose a terrible point, I have to let that moment pass and move straight on. Because if I perseverate on that, let it consume my minute, my hour, I lose the match and everything is over. And the same sort of learning fact, I think, is true for fertility docs, because we see immediate highs and immediate lows, like diagnosing a miscarriage at 12 weeks at graduation. And then it's a sad moment that no one can describe unless you're there. I mean, it is sadder than anything someone can imagine, right? And then you have to pop out, knock on the next door, and be all hyped up for the next patient who's going through a stim and cheer them on that their egg retrieval is around the corner and things are going to go well. So that sort of emotional back and forth, I think it can be very taxing if you don't know yourself well enough to go through those motions.
So what you just described, some older generations and some cultures might just call grit, and they might call tenacity. And I wonder how much of that do you think has been lost in the current generation and subsequent generations and is still needed? Because I think, yeah, I'm a millennial. I'm kind of like right in the core of the millennial years, and I had grown up with a sort of notion that grit is this outdated thing and we should all be in touch with our emotions. We should all find our purpose and our passion. And I think that for a lot of people, that has caused a lot of unhappiness. And one of the things that's really grounded me over the past few years is thinking, well, why would I assume that we should all just have this magic purpose where we feel so fulfilled and so happy all the time? Like, what baseline, what imaginary world am I comparing that to when the baseline of reality is 200,000 years of poverty, oppression, war, starvation, like true human suffering for the like most of our history as a species. And like, I look at any of our ancestors, like whether hunter gatherers or agrarians or those in the industrial age, they they did not have it good most of the time. And so if I think, well, I your job is to work for a certain period of time and you do the best by the people that you're serving, and you try to craft your skills so that you're having some self-actualization and working towards building abilities and manifesting more of it. But at the end of the day, we are putting food on the table for our families, and that life is pretty good compared to everybody else's. I think, like, yeah, to hell with it if I don't feel fulfilled all the time. Like, just move on, just get on with it. So how much do you think it's just like we need some more of that grit versus maybe some more of the tools that you were talking about?
I mean, it's got to be both. Grit is beautiful. I'm the only son in an immigrant family. And when you hear stories that my parents tell me about their lives coming to the US, yeah, they had grit. They had grit more than I'll ever understand. Truly, I wouldn't survive with their skill set back then with the situation that they were in of that time, of that place. It would be tough. But I think physicians have a different kind of grit. I think a lot of grit is a physical, mental grit that we've cultivated from training. I think, maybe we didn't have 3-day call shifts like they did 30 years ago, but there were weeks I worked 120 hours. It was tough. But I think grit is just the output. It's the product. But maybe our generation, ours and those younger, I would say, because I'm also with the very, very sort of the oldest possible millennial out there, there's probably a gracefulness that you could carry yourself in through the field. And I know it's very metaphysical conversation at this point, but we have skills that we can learn. We know so much more about mental health and balance and professional purpose and how to find harmony in your life between work and family. These are all tools that we can use now. How do we communicate? So it doesn't have to be this swallowing of frustration that then shows up in other areas of life. If you just buckle down and have that grit, maybe your work output is good, but that stress is going to come out in some other area of life, whether it's your interpersonal relationships or your health or whatever is going to happen. My friends are going to crack up when they hear me use this quote, but Timothy Chalamet has this interview and he says, he's talking to some interviewer. He basically says, you can be captain of your fate and master of your soul, but life needs to come from you and not at you. And sometimes that takes time to figure that out. And I think this job, if you have a strange mindset and you just kind of walk in like you're not really fully prepared, it will feel like a job that is just coming at you. Like I can say in Houston, it's not, we've got a great model and I think we could always be busier. We got great support staff and I love my teams. All of that is great. But I can say it would feel physically uncomfortable for doctors to start hitting 350, 400 cycles. That's where I think life starts to sound crazy. And I look at these other doctors that are hitting close to 1,000 and I'm like, I don't even understand how that's possible, right? So life might be coming at you, but if you can figure out how to make life come from you, maybe there's some gracefulness in that. And I think that medical school, it's kind of a weird, sad joke, but medical school probably identifies people with a bunch of hobbies and extracurriculars because they know you're going to have to give all that stuff up for 20 years. And then hopefully you have some sort of core identity to fall back on when you hit that 10-year mark and you realize as an attending, it's like, all right, so you've passed your boards, you have mastery over your subject, you've got great clinical care. Maybe you've got a family surrounding you, supporting you, whatever life has brought you, but maybe you have to have some core identity to kind of help push you through those last 20 years as well. And that's great. I think it's a great model, but maybe it's more than just, let's just bear down and fight it through and push through because we're all missing some grit. That's what I would say. And I should say a disclaimer. My wife is a clinical psychologist. So, we talk about a lot of this stuff at home all the time.
Speaking of clinical psychologists, do you ever get to take advantage of Ali Domar and her work with Inception? Because as you're talking about, when you were saying, oncologists get a lot more training, I'm like, yeah, nobody really trains fertility doctors on this stuff. And then I was like, wait a minute, except for Ali, and she works for you guys. So do you ever get to take advantage of that?
She does. She's been a great resource. She is involved in some research studies, and there was a stint where she was traveling around the clinics, basically teaching about empathy and all of that. I love the role that she plays, although I do think this is probably more of a personal journey more than anybody could teach you. I don't think you're going to get these sentiments from like a book or a seminar, and I almost hate to say it, but maybe you have to go through the paces yourself to like feel the burnout and feel the moral injury or have something happen in your life where then you kind of come out the other side with a totally different perspective. And I think it's great. I've had, and even residency, the residency is a time where there's a lot of self-sacrifice, let's put it that way. And I was trained by this incredible team of docs, and the chairman at the time, who was a dear friend of mine, and we still keep in touch, at his graduation speech for us, the first thing he said is that you guys are the first patients that you guys take care of every day, like us ourselves. And like, you don't really know what that means, but now I totally get it. Because when you deprioritize self and you are trying to climb whatever corporate ladder or whatever the case may be, it is tough. And, 10 years in, that's probably when that burnout starts to settle in and you might have to ask some tough questions.
If you didn't feel like there was another opportunity for you to get out of that rut 7 to 10 years in, I'm guessing you would have found a different practice. What do you like about Inception or Prelude, or what is it that you feel like they're able to offer people that are in that situation?
Totally. So on one hand, I think a lot of these networks at the contract level are starting to sound very similar, from what I gather from these fellows, the text, the boilerplate language, it's all the same, right? And whether or not it's actually true, I think a lot of these networks are starting to be very different. And you wouldn't know that necessarily as a patient, because I see patients from all different networks and they come to us, whatever, second, third opinion. And maybe they're a little bit shocked to hear that I have like a hot take on all these networks. But Inception, I think, is unique because it's not necessarily led by like this whole cadre of physicians, and there's nothing wrong with physician leaders. I got a lot of them in these different networks that I call personal friends of mine. But I think when physician leaders are at the helm, surprisingly, there may be a lot of rank and file behavior. Like, this is just the way it is because we've got the experience and it kind of has to trickle down.
Tell me more about this, because I think one of the criticisms that many people have about corporate medicine is that there's not sufficient physician leadership. You're saying there could be cons to physician leadership, if I'm characterizing correctly.
Well, there could be, there doesn't have to be, but let's rewind back to academic medicine. Academic medicine, since its beginning, or let's use a pun, since its inception, has actually been set up where the more you publish, the more professorship you attain, the more academic rigor you have, somehow that qualifies you to lead a department. And all of us have these unbelievable stories of how you promote somebody who has physician leadership skills by virtue of them having 300 publications. And then all of a sudden, a department or division implodes on itself. So again, not generalizing as a monolith that physicians make bad leaders, but I think there's just been this history that like physicians should make great leadership. They should be great leaders because they've done X, Y, and Z. And I don't necessarily think, corporate leadership necessarily, that Venn diagram of skill sets overlaps with anything that a physician has spent the last 20 years trying to figure out how to do. I mean, for God's sakes, we've spent, 3,000 hours a year trying to figure out how to dissect out the ureter. Like, how does that translate to like leadership skills, So, these networks are pretty different. I also think that, here's a hot take, I feel that evidence-based medicine is challenging. And although it is a nice guiding light for our field, we are one of the main specialties in all of medicine that is sort of testing the limits of evidence-based medicine. And I would even say that the fallacy of evidence-based medicine has actually shown up many, many times in our field because, you protocol A over and over and over again because the evidence tells you to, but all of us have these experiences where you start to try these things and next thing you know, you have a better outcome than what the evidence actually suggests. And so again, just a hot take, but Inception was sort of built around a corporate team. And because they are not physician leaders, they've been able to sort of raise up physician leaders, which is cool. And I was talking to, I will not mention the name or the network, but I was talking to a junior physician a couple weeks ago, and they felt like there was a lot of sort of walls around how they could practice, that they had to do it this way, they had to do it that way. If they wanted to deviate, they have to run it up the medical board. They didn't feel like they had a lot of clinical agency or autonomy in their life, which I thought was interesting. And then I said, well, why didn't you think about joining our team? And they said, well, I just thought that you guys would all work the same because you guys have these corporate leaders. And I said, well, interestingly, I think it's the opposite way around. Because we have corporate leadership, a lot of those clinical decisions are left in the hands of physicians. And that actually means that we have a lot of autonomy. Would you believe that in Houston, we have many different doctors that have totally different philosophies on something simple as day 3 or day 5 to test or not to test, And she was shocked to hear that. She's like, why don't you guys advertise that more? And I'm like, I don't know, but maybe we should, because that difference between networks may not be clear until you're literally a physician within that.
Do you think that has something to do with a leadership team that learns lessons and is willing to change? I have a little bit of a favorable bias towards your guys' leadership team because I've done, and so there's a bias there because I've done some business with you all and I've done business with TJ, and there are things that you can learn about someone only when you do business with them. There are varying degrees of that, and I've never gone and worked for you all, so that's a different boat that I can't speak to. But there have been times where it's just like, man, TJ did the right thing. That was the right thing to do. Like Lindsay or other people on your, they did the right thing. And you can see them doing the right things. If you had different people, would it be a very different situation?
Yeah, I mean, in many ways, I ended up in this organization through almost no choice of my own. And I'm lucky that I did because life could have ended up in any other different way. But the people that came before me made decisions to partner with this network. And I'm happy they did. TJ and Lindsay are good friends of mine. And, I think I don't know if you see these marketing campaigns, but the marketing campaign from Inception is really different. And I think thinks about sort of the honest journey of fertility rather than sort of the, pictures of families and like, let's just throw 10 more pictures of families out there and let's make this sound like, bubblegums and unicorns. Like it's not like that. And so, yeah, I've gotten to know them, fairly well over the last couple of years. And I would agree with your assessment. Doing the right thing is a big part of it. I wish I could take credit for that part of it, but I just got here when I got here, and I'm lucky enough to be in Houston.
What did you tell? Did you say anything to the person who commented on that Facebook post? If so, what did you tell them? If not, what would you tell them?
Well, how about this? I did not post because I'm more lurking than posting these days, but I actually have some of the follow-up posts afterwards. And unfortunately, I don't think there are easy answers. I think it's just more facets of the same side of the coin. So the second post goes like this. Perhaps my biggest regret after 25 years of practice is that I was always working when my kids were young. I had an epiphany when some friends and colleagues my age or younger developed serious medical issues or even died, and I decided to take the time to pursue the things on the list before it's too late. Who on their deathbed says, wow, I wish I did another retrieval? Post 3. Thanks so much for posting. You're definitely not alone. A few years ago, my older son said, Mom, you're here, but you're not here. And that's when I knew I needed to make some changes. I had started to feel like a warm body in private practice, and that is not how I wanted to feel at all. I switched to academics. I also launched a fertility coaching practice, which has been my passion project, and I also believe my purpose and legacy. Last year, he said, Mom, you're back. I feel it too, and I'm so grateful. The posts go on. I mean, they just go on and on and on. And I think the moral of the story when I zoom out is that there's not some sage advice that I could give these people and say, like, if you follow these steps, you won't find burnout or you'll get through your burnout. Like, I don't think that's a journey that I can call for anybody. But I think sharing these struggles publicly and bringing them to light, that's sort of step one, and sort of knowing what signs to watch out for, having a plan in place before maybe the 7 to 10 year mark. Because if you start to see those signs, it's not like this panic and be like, I have to quit my job. I have to change practices. I have to move cities. I have to switch to academics, because I don't think that's necessarily the solution either. But if you know, and you can equip yourself and prepare and maybe dovetail your life where you've got whatever, professional development, hobbies, clinical care, I think that's the most we can all hope for, is some sort of graceful entrance, a great career, and then one day, hopefully, a graceful exit. But yeah, it's a personal thing, I would say.
Maybe a non-REI needs to say this because, as you mentioned, there can be a sentiment of the positive pregnancy tests just aren't getting me over the hump in the same way that they used to. And it sounds like that thought is present there, where you get to the end of your career and you're thinking, will I ever regret not having done one more retrieval? And I think for somebody, they're going to be saying, thank God that person did one more retrieval. Someone's grandkids, someone's children, nieces, nephew, they are thinking, thank everything good that that person did that retrieval instead of not doing it. And maybe they don't know to think of it in those terms because they don't know what you all are going through, but they do feel that at some level, or it's at least true at some level. If they were forced to think about it, it's so meaningful. And I think, yeah, you're not going to get to the end of your career and think, well, I wish I spent a little bit more time on YouTube. I wish I watched a couple more Netflix shows. I
love YouTube, by the way.
I can get sucked into it too, but I realize that there are things in the middle that you have to declare war on. Meaning, we all say like, well, yeah, if I took this one more meeting, I'm not going to get to my end of the life and regret that. But I would regret if I didn't build something, if I didn't push myself to the limit of my skill set, if I didn't build something that provided a really good livelihood for my family, I would regret that. And on the other hand, I would absolutely regret if I didn't spend enough time with my children, if I didn't develop these hobbies outside of work, if I didn't get involved in these community activities. And so then the thing that we really regret at the end of our lives is anything that's not in those categories, like anything that isn't an instrumental good or an inherent good is something that needs to go in the garbage. And very often that's the fantasy football, that's the video games, that's the happy hours. And I'm not saying anything against people can do those in more meaningful ways, but we all have a middle in the society we live in where we've got multiple opportunities and multiple distractions, and you got to wage war on that. So that's the stuff that's got to go, because we have to work hard, because we have to do other things in our personal and family lives. What do you think is the most important thing for you to hang on to when you get to the end of your life? What are you saying that, yeah, I'm glad that I didn't do any less of that?
Yeah, I mean, even before I answer that question, I think this job has given us all so much. This field, the subspecialty, whatever you want to call it. And, I would still say it's the best specialty in all of medicine. Our worst, most boring day, like you said, we're changing lives. And maybe it's easy to forget that because we are increasingly spending more time in front of a computer screen and less time doing the scans, at bedside. Consults aren't necessarily life-giving, I would say, because this job is a professional speaking gig. You're only as busy as how quickly you can talk. And there's just a lot of talking to be had. So, how many hours a day can one person talk? So it can feel like you're using a lot of mental energy to get through this. But that's sort of the downside. The upside is that this is a beautiful specialty. I'm lucky to be here. And there are many versions of life where I wasn't lucky enough to be here. And I'm fully aware of that. But, in terms of, what I think are the most important things for me, I mean, I have a family that I love. I think a lot of the Inception team will say this too, that family comes before work. And, when we have business meetings, there is a priority to sort of, hopefully, if possible, shut things down so we can all see each other's families and kids and put them to bed and all of that. Because, I think in this 7 to 10 year stage, and probably before, probably one reason why there's a burnout at 7 to 10 years, those are incredibly difficult years personally as well, not just professionally. Those are often years where you're, I don't know, trying to buy a house, trying to like raise little humans. Maybe you got one kid, maybe you're two kids, maybe you have three kids and you happen to be a female, and society has unfortunately pushed a lot of the child raising responsibilities on the female partner, even though they're also physicians, right? It's like all of these things can really start to wear, but then you realize in your 40s that this is this beautiful, sweet window of time where your kids are young. They're not going to be young forever. And maybe time with them is really precious. And I would never regret another minute with my family, even though my two kids do fight, as they should. But I also think finding that professional fulfillment, life is about contrast. And I don't think I would be as good of a parent if I didn't have a professional life to sort of engage my intellectual side. And I wouldn't be a great physician without being a parent and knowing what some of these families are trying to achieve, because I know it's so sweet that final destination that they're after, to see two people or one person or whatever the story may be, that they're chasing this dream of a family. And I just know, like, why did the universe make this hard for them? Like, they'd be great parents, and that really sucks, but maybe we can help them, get that dream. So I think it's really special. But yeah, I think the moral of all of this is that it's such a personal journey for each individual. And I think there's a lot of power in sharing these stories, knowing that physician burnout can be real, whatever you want to call it, moral injury, and that we give a lot of our lives to medicine. If life was 300 years long and you sacrifice 35 of those years for medicine, all right, whatever, that's cool. But life is not that long. But most of us are in our mid 30s before we start our first jobs. And that's wild. It's truly wild. So
I've been enjoying getting to know you the past couple months, Jason. I'm glad you came on today. I'm definitely going to have you back on because I know that you have captured something in today's conversation that's going to resonate with people. So I'm going to have you back on the podcast to talk more in the future, and I look forward to it. Thanks for coming on the show.
thank you for having me. That was super fun. We'll take care soon. a lot of these networks at the contract level are starting to sound very similar. The text, the boilerplate language, it's all the same, right? But the marketing campaign from Inception is really different. And I think about sort of the honest journey of fertility rather than sort of the pictures of families and like, let's just throw 10 more pictures of families out there and let's make this sound like bubblegums and unicorns. Like, it's not like that.
Today's advertiser helped make the production and delivery of this episode possible for free to you. But the themes expressed by the guests do not necessarily reflect the views of Inside Reproductive Health, nor of the advertiser. The advertiser does not have editorial control over the content of this episode, and the guest's appearance is not an endorsement of the advertiser. Thank you for listening to Inside Reproductive Health.